So the retro gaming scene has taken on a new dynamic, and there are two perceptions that are prevailing within the retro game community, within the retro game collecting community. And I think one is grounded in reality, and one is definitely grounded in perception. And I want to talk about the two because we're always thinking about and looking at the current state of retro game collecting, or at least some of us. And I wanted to talk about the two perspectives in this video, primarily because there was a video that was put out by Phoenix Resale where he did another one of his interviews where he goes to game stores, around the country. I think his last video was probably closer to his area in Kentucky, and he basically asked these game store owners what they're seeing in terms of retro game collecting, video game collecting, and things of that nature, and how that type of business is progressing here in 2025. And so I kind of wanted to just talk about the ideas behind those videos. I know there have been a couple of videos that have been put out around Phoenix Resale's video, specifically in relation to a lot of the comments that he got on that video, where a lot of people were pretty much blaming him for the current downtrend in retro game collecting. And so I kind of wanted to just touch on the two perspectives, right? So there's one perspective that's really based on perception, and that perception of retro gaming, the retro game community, retro game collecting, that perception is heavily based on social media, not just YouTube, but also what you see on Instagram, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, Mercari. All of these things kind of shape the perception around where retro game collecting is, and what the market actually looks like. So you have that side of it. And then you also have the reality side of it. What's actually happening, not necessarily on a national level, but what's really happening more so on a micro level in your specific area, in your community. Because we got to be honest, no, not all of us have the ability to travel across the country sourcing video games. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably only sourcing video games locally in your local area. Maybe you're willing to travel 20, 30, maybe even 50 miles out from your local area, but that's about it. You're not driving hundreds or thousands of miles to see if you can get a specific video game or to see if you can go game hunting. So that's the reality side of it, and then you have the perception side of it. When it comes to the perception side of it, that's very tricky, especially when it comes to YouTube, because people, especially content creators, they're really going to only show you the best of the best. 9 times out of 10, they're going to show you the best of the best. Even for someone like me, while yes, I may do a video where I show you, a couple of cheap video game pickups. Like for instance, when I made a video showing you guys all of the original Xbox games that I picked up, like Jade Empire, which is like a $10 game, or Baldur's Gate, which is like another $10 game, or when I picked up, a couple other games like B-Boy, a game that probably no one's ever heard of or even cares about. Right? When we show certain videos, yeah, we'll show these games from time to time, but these aren't the videos that get 100,000 views, or those aren't the ones that get a lot of the views. No, when you come to a retro gaming channel, you're coming to see the heavy hitting games like the Adventures of Batman and Robin, or maybe you want to see the time that I picked up Mega Man X2, or maybe you're probably coming to a channel and you want to see about the time where I picked up Def Jam Fight for New York Takeover. And so if you're watching retro gaming content and you're looking at this, you're thinking to yourself, wow, there's a lot of games out there. People are doing a lot of hunting and people are finding amazing games. And that's just my channel, right? You have channels where people are buying entire game lots where they're getting 2 and 3 game cubes. They're getting, copies of Pokemon Gale of Darkness and Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And they're getting all of these games, these huge lots of video games for $200 and $300. And the thing about that is that, you know, that's not an everyday occurrence. That's part one. That's one thing that you don't see. And two, um, what a lot of viewers don't see is all of the footwork that goes behind these amazing scores. Even with someone like Gamer's Manual, one of his last videos was amazing. He had an amazing video where he showcased a ton of really rare and expensive games that he picked up. But what I noticed that was different about this video is that this video pretty much covered 3 months worth of game hunting. If my math is correct, and if I was looking at the dates in his video correctly, it showcased pretty much 3 months of game hunting, which, you know, that's still those his pickups were amazing. Even if he picked all that up in a matter of 6 months, he still did an amazing job with those pickups. But I say all that to say that that had been his first video in a while, where, you know, I was used to kind of seeing more frequent videos from him. And that's not just him. That's from a few people that I used to see doing heavy hitting pickups. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not picking up games. They could be picking them up, but they're just not showcasing them. And the same could be said for a lot of people who are picking up games, but they're just not showcasing them on YouTube. But my point when it comes to the YouTube piece is that YouTube will make you think to a certain degree that there's still a ton of games out there that you can go game hunting, and that it's all peaches and cream, and that people are still, you know, willing to spend money on certain games and buy certain games, right? Um, but the reality is that that may not necessarily be the case. Now, you also might look at something like an eBay, right? Where for certain games, if you go on eBay, a lot of folks are still charging or asking really high prices on certain video games, right? They're still asking for, exorbitant amounts for certain games, but it doesn't mean that that's what people are spending their, it doesn't mean that people are necessarily buying those games, right? That could be what the ask is, but the sold is a completely different ball game, and a lot of you already know that. And so when it comes to the perception of retro game hunting, I think that there's still a good amount of energy behind it, because we still have certain channels like the Retro Ricks, the Phoenix Resales, and beyond that showcase retro game hunting and still promote it, because they themselves still have a very much a vested interest in keeping this community alive. In fact, many of them, if not all of them, have completely dedicated their lives to it. They've quit their day jobs, they've sold out on retro gaming. They've completely sold out. And so they're at a stage now in 2025 where this business has to work for them. It has to. Otherwise, it's back to the drawing board, and they have to figure out a whole new hustle. They have to figure out a whole new game plan, right? So you have that side of it. And then you have the reality side of it, where you have what's really going on in your specific area, right? And this is where it gets really, really crucial. And this is where the understanding and expectations become very important. If you live in a small town of 1,000 people, where you've got one gas station, one supermarket, one Walmart for hundreds and hundreds of miles, it's really you have to set the right expectations, right? You can't expect to be able to find all of the games that, say, like Easy Gamer will find in a month. Like Easy Gamers, a great channel, by the way. I recommend you guys check him out. He's constantly finding some of the sickest stuff that I've seen on YouTube. But if you live in a really small town, you can't expect to find the stuff that someone like Easy Gamers finds, because he lives in Southern California. He's amongst a lot of major cities in Southern California that have a ton of Game Stops, that do a ton of yard sales, that just is heavily populated. Southern California is heavily populated. I used to live in Southern California, so when he's going from Riverside to LA to Orange County to Temecula to Fontana to, Rancho, Yucaipa, all those cities in Southern California, right? Wherever he's going, Redlands, it doesn't matter. And I know I just listed off a bunch of cities in the Inland Empire, right? But there's definitely more I'm sure he goes to. But my point is that someone like him, he's got a massive pond to fish out of, And so his collecting experience and his perception on the retro game community is going to be way different from someone who lives in a small town where people aren't even thinking about retro games. They're probably thinking about feeding their families. Maybe it's a small cattle town, maybe it's a farming town where those types of things don't matter, right? And so I think it's very subjective. And it really just depends on where you're at. You have some parts of Middle America where, yeah, there's a gaming community, but it's a very specific gaming community, right? Like I think in one of the stores that Phoenix Resale went to, one of the store owners, if I'm not mistaken, I think he said he's never had a PS Vita game. Like he doesn't even carry PS Vita, which for someone who lives on the coast, like if you're in New York or if you're in California, the Vita is huge, all right? Like if you're on the coast or if you're in a major city, like we know about the Vita. But there are some parts of the country, like Middle America, where they only know about Nintendo. It's Nintendo over everything, right? Like, if it's not Nintendo, it's almost not even looked at. Forget the Sega Genesis. Like the Sega Genesis is the stepchild of gaming, which still blows my mind today in 2025. Like the fact that so many people don't realize how freaking insane the Sega Genesis was and how in so many ways it actually is better than the Super Nintendo. I'll let you guys debate that in the comments, but all that being said, there are still some parts of the country where like the Sega Genesis even isn't even like viewed in any type of capacity. And so I say all that to say that, oh, here go the lawn guys. My lawn guys are cutting the grass. So if you hear a lawnmower, my gardening team is here. But anyway, when you consider that, right, the reality of the retro game community is going to be very different for you depending on where you're at, right? So if you're in a part of the country where you only see Nintendo games and there are no Nintendo games left, you're bummed, right? Or if you're in a part of the country where you don't get to see the variety that you might see in like an Easy Gamers video where you go from Turbo Graphics to Sega Saturn to whatever the case may be. All of these things factor into how people really feel about what's happening in the retro gaming space and in the retro game community, and if there are opportunities still to build a collection or engage in the hobby. And it all boils down to what your market and economy looks like. There are certain parts of the country where a game that might sell for $80 in New York, people will be willing to let that game go for $50 in a smaller state. But that's because, in a place like New York, everybody's a hustler. We want top dollar for everything. You know what I'm saying? Like nothing's cheap over here. But it just varies, right? That might be different. And so what does this all mean? Like what does this all boil down to when you kind of merge the reality you're seeing out there with the perception that's created online and in social media? Well, ultimately to me, it kind of creates this perception that where I personally think a lot of your fringe collectors have walked away because of two things: price and competition. And I've said this before. I think a lot of fringe collectors, a lot of people who had mild interest in the hobby, they're like, man, I'm not competing with resellers all day for video games, and I'm not paying high prices either. So I just quit. There's another YouTuber. I'm trying to think of his name. I think it's Another Game Collector or just Another Game Collector. I'm trying to remember his name, but he put out a video, and I've watched some of his videos. I think I'm subscribed. If I'm not, I gotta go check to see if I'm subscribed to his channel. But he put out a video where he spent a whole like Friday morning, like literally chasing a reseller. Like he went to like 5 different yard sales, and every time he got to the yard sale, someone told him that he just missed all the games because a reseller just beat him to the punch. And he was basically chasing a ghost all morning. People don't want to do that. Now, he'll probably still collect because he's an avid collector and he already has a decent sized collection, or a massive collection, actually. I think he did a video and he's got a really big collection. But he might still stay in the hobby. But other people aren't going to go for that. They're going to be like, you know what, I'm done with this. And I think people are mentally drained. They are mentally drained. They are mentally exhausted by all of the rosy pictures that are presented on social media that aren't really matching with what they're seeing in reality. And I don't think it means that there's a massive fall off in the retro game community, but there is a slow drip feed of people walking away from the hobby, which I think in turn will hurt game store owners like local mom and pop shops who are now not only having to compete with the likes of a Phoenix Resale, but they also have to compete with GameStop, right? Because I am a avid retro game collector. I mean, dude, I am a massive retro game collector in my local area, right? I thoroughly enjoy buying and collecting retro games. But you know what? I go to GameStop because especially like now during a buy two get one week, I know I can buy two retro games no matter what the price is and get them for free. There's no limitations. There's no the game has to be $9.99 or under. None of that like weird rules that you sometimes see at mom and pop shops. That's part one. Part two is I can order from their online site. They've got multiple locations. If I buy a game from one location that doesn't work, I can go to a location that's closer and return it. And so just that competition between resellers, GameStop getting in the way, and then people who just don't want to compete because, yes, while yes, GameStop does carry this stuff, you still got to compete with the resellers that are pillaging GameStop, right? So I think all of these things are impacting the retro game community. And while I don't think it's dead, and I don't think people are walking away from the hobby in in droves, I don't think there's a mass exodus. I do think that year over year, it is falling off year over year. The excitement and the hype that we see in 2025 is not what it was in 2024, definitely not what it was in 2023, and is a far cry from what we saw in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Those 3 years were the golden years, and those years are gone. I don't know what it's going to take for there to be the same type of resurgence and interest, but the current state of retro gaming is very peculiar right now. And I think if you want to get into it, you just have to do a lot more research than you did before. But let me know what you think about this. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.